So hi everyone. Thanks again everyone for coming to the end of summer CI Compass Student Fellowship Symposium. I know this is some of your first time, so just wanted to give you a little bit of background. So in the springtime, we have our summer fellows with us and they take an online class with us where they learn some technical skills and also about major mid-scale facilities and research infrastructures and cyber infrastructure. And in the summertime, they're placed at the summer fellows are placed at various locations and have some hands-on project work that they do. And so we're really excited because at the end of the summer, this is where we come together for our summer symposium and let all of our students present what they worked on in the summer. And so each student will have some time to present and then also some time for questions and answers. And I know that Nikki and I will definitely let you know when your time's up. And so we definitely want to give time for Q&A. And unless Nikki, or Eva, did you have anything else to add? Wanted to thank all of our summer mentors and thank you everyone for being involved, and all the students are really excited to hear your work. So unless anyone has anything else to add, we can start with our first student. All right, so Naomi, you are up.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for being here. I'll share my screen. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see this. But hi everyone, I'm Naomi. Over the summer, I worked with Globus Labs on adaptive tool selection in a scalable genomics pipeline. So some background on my project, I created an FMT viral detection pipeline as part of my undergraduate research at U of A before I had started this internship. And over the summer, I used Parcel to make my original pipeline more efficient and also make it scalable. And then from there, I applied adaptive tool selection with Academy, where I created autonomous agents. So some background on my original project, FMT stands for fecal microbial transplant, and it's a process used to treat C. diff, which is a bacteria that grows in somebody's gut and disrupts the growth of all bacteria within that patient's gut microbiome. And so this diagram over here shows a really good example of this paper that looked at bacteria as they traveled from donor to patient through the stool transfer, and what bacteria stayed within the patients after the transfer and helped the patient regrow their gut microbiome. So my project is very similar, except I'm looking at viruses and how they traveled from donor to patient and then also over time. And I was able to actually use the data set from this paper because I'm taking a metagenomic approach, meaning I'm not just looking at a viromic data set, I'm looking at metagenomic data. And this is because a lot of the viruses I'm looking for are temperate viruses, meaning that they're inserted into a bacterial host cell. So by taking the metagenomic approach, I can make sure I can at least try to find all of those viruses. And my original pipeline took in assembled contigs and then created a file with a list of all viruses that were found, along with their annotation. And then from there, they can be tracked back to which donor or patient that virus came from. So this is a diagram of what my original pipeline looked like. It was formatted as a bunch of different shell scripts and then one main launch script. And all of the shell scripts were launched off with SBatch, and I used a Slurm array for having all of the samples being run at the same time. But one important thing that you can notice, especially for the first 3 steps, is that although all of the samples can run in parallel here, before, for example, the check V step can start, which checks for quality, the GenomeAd step, which is the actual viral detection tool, has to be finished with all of the samples before this step can start. And that's just due to the nature of how my launch script was created. All of the samples had to be done with one step before the next step could start. So that's why I used Parcel. Parcel is a Python library that allows you to create apps, and all of these apps run concurrently. However, tasks are only executed once their dependencies are met. So if you create something within Parcel, it will create this graph of all tasks that need to be completed along with all of their dependencies. And so I kind of like to think of it as natural parallel programming, because by default, everything will be run in parallel unless a task has a certain dependency that it's waiting for. So with using Parcel, I was able to make my original pipeline a lot more efficient. As you can see, with these first 3 steps, instead of having to wait for every sample to be done with one step, each sample can run individually through all 3 steps, and all of these samples can run in parallel. So I was able to do this through Parcel. However, as you can see at the clustering step, we still have to wait for all samples to be completed. And that's just due to the nature of what clustering does. It requires the viral findings from all samples to be combined into one file before you can find representative sequences. However, just making these first 3 steps a lot more efficient made my overall pipeline a lot more efficient because these were the 3 most time-consuming steps anyways. And so after porting my pipeline into Parcel, I was also able to scale the workflow through changing the configuration. So as you can see, the green here is my original pipeline with the shell scripts. And before officially porting my pipeline into Parcel, I made it just a single Python script to make that a little bit easier to use Parcel. So this is what the yellow represents. That's just the single Python script without Parcel. And so it became a lot less efficient just because I wasn't able to use the Slurm arrays anymore. But after porting it into Parcel, I was able to scale it up with the amount of nodes I was using. And as you can see, around 4 nodes is when it becomes most efficient. I think this is most likely due to the fact that the time that I'm measuring also includes the time needed to request the resources on my scheduler. So I think once you get to higher amounts of nodes, it gets a little less clear because it may take a lot of times to actually receive that amount of resources for the pipeline, and it may not be that much more efficient adding in those amounts of nodes. However, I'm currently collecting data on the time needed without waiting for the resources so I can validate whether this hypothesis is true. For the second part of my experiment, I was using Academy. Academy is a middleware for building autonomous agents. And Academy allows these agents to communicate with each other and actually pass messages and files to and from each other. Another cool thing about Academy is that it allows you to have different configurations for every single agent that you create. So whereas with Parcel, I had one configuration for the entire pipeline, now I'm able to have unique configurations for every single agent. So for example, the first tool, which is GenomeAd, which is the viral detection tool, is very resource heavy, and I'm allowed to give that tool more nodes, whereas a tool like the clustering tool might just need more memory, but not as many nodes. And so this allows you to make the workflow a lot more resource efficient. So this is what my agentified version of the workflow looks like. So as you can see, as opposed to it being just a straight linear workflow, it's now sort of an agentic loop. Another difference here is that before I just had the GenomeAd viral detection tool, whereas now I have also VirSorter2 and Deep VirFinder. And these tools all differ in whether they are homology based, which is based off comparing to a database, or machine learning based. And so how this workflow works is the CheckV agent, which checks the quality of the viral findings, sends a quality score back to the viral detection agent. And then the BLAST agent, which compares the viral findings against a database, sends a score of how many viruses actually match to the database back to the viral detection agent. And from there, this agent can decide which tool might be the best tool for the database being used with the workflow. So for example, since VirSorter2 is homology based, if you had a database with a bunch of very commonly found viruses, that tool, VirSorter2, might be the best tool for that database. Whereas if you had a database with a bunch of rare unknown viruses, a machine learning based tool like Deep VirFinder might be a better tool. And this is what this aims to discover as it runs. Overall, I learned a lot throughout the summer. I learned a lot about high performance computing, resource management, and also workflow management with using things like Parcel and Academy. I came into this project only ever creating a pipeline through creating shell scripts and then a launch script and using SBatch and Slurm. And so learning about all these different ways that you can create a workflow and then manage that workflow and use your resources carefully has been super helpful and interesting to me. And I think it's something I'm going to carry forward in a lot of my future research. I also learned a lot about agents and how you agentify a workflow, which this was super interesting to me because I didn't even know this was something that existed. So it was super cool to learn. I also learned a lot about the importance of organized data collection and documenting every step, along with uploading everything to GitHub so you don't lose any progress. And then finally, I learned about the importance of creativity when in a workflow. I think I had only ever thought of my workflow as something linear, and learning that I could turn that into an agentic loop was super interesting, and it required a lot of creative thinking. Overall, for the future of this project, I am currently working on a poster to submit to the student research competition at the SC25 conference. I also think another really important part of the future of this project is being able to expand my agentic workflow to other data sets to understand and explore the tool selection process, to see if other data sets do really have a different, what they consider best tool for that data set. I also think there's still a lot of possibilities to explore with the agents I created. For example, the BLAST agent, it currently just compares the viral findings to the database that I'm using and tells the viral detection agent how many viruses matched. But I think it could also take the viruses that didn't match and collect annotation through other outside resources. I think that could be really cool. Overall, I want to thank my mentors, Alec, Greg, and Kyle, for an amazing summer. They were great mentors, and I learned a lot, and I'm very grateful for them. I also want to thank Globus Labs and NSF CI Compass for supporting me and making this opportunity possible. I just had an amazing summer. And if you want to check out my code, there's a link and then also a QR code. But thank you, everybody.
Okay, so our next student is Anshuraj.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Anshuraj. I'm a rising senior at Colorado University, studying computer science and math and physics as my minor. Over the last 8 weeks, I've been working at MIT as a part of the MIT Summer Research Program on surrogate models in exoplanet atmospheric characterization under the mentorship of Dr. Priscilla and Dr. Zavala. So first of all, let's talk about what exoplanets are. So exoplanets are any planet that orbits star outside of our solar system. There are almost 6,000 of these verified so far, and there are hundreds more in the pipeline to be verified in the next few years. And why do we care about their atmosphere? So understanding the atmospheric condition is very necessary if we want to know if the planet is habitable or not, because understanding the chemical components and the constituents of the atmosphere help us determine if it is produced by living organism or in the presence of living organism. But there's only so much we can do in terms of like the observations and the vast amount of data the space telescopes produce. So how do we study their atmosphere? So we analyze the light that passes through the atmosphere or comes from the atmosphere. So how it works is when we have a star, and if we imagine a cloud of gas, when the light strikes the cloud of gas, it emits a different kind of light. So the emitted light can be, the spectrum for it can be different from the spectrum from the host star itself. It's because some of the chemical components in the cloud itself might be emitting some of the light a little bit differently. So that's why we see color lines in the spectrum for the emission spectra. Now, if the light passes through the cloud of gas and then we see it that way, then some of the chemical compound might actually absorb the light that's coming from the star itself. So these can be identified by the dark lines or the gaps in the spectrum itself. So that is absorption spectrum. So this we do with the planet atmosphere when it's passing in front of the star or about to go behind the star. So talking about absorption spectra, so one of its type is a transmission spectra, and this is what it looks like for the Earth atmosphere. So we have the wavelength on the x-axis and the amount of light blocked in the y-axis. So for Earth, we see different chemical abundances at different wavelength, and this is how we try to figure out what's in the other planet atmosphere as well. So how do we gain insights from this, and what is the main challenge behind doing this? So getting a raw spectrum from a star to identifying its atmospheric composition is very complex. We start with the noisy telescope data. We run it through a model that has a bunch of atmospheric physics and chemistry involved with radiative transfer equations and all. And we do a parameter sweep for different kind of chemical compounds, because the resultant spectra can be a combination of any kind of compounds. So in order to find the best fit, we go through millions of combinations to have the best and the accurate model in terms of the physics we know about the planet or the atmosphere itself. And it usually we usually take like temperature, pressure, and molecular abundances at many layers in order to find what exactly we get. And the result is often a very accurate. Results are very accurate, and they are based on actual physics we know about atmospheres. The only downside is that it can take up to hours and days to do this for one planet, and it can be very expensive computationally. And when we are doing this in thousands of planets, it can take a long period of time. So this is where our research comes in, where we use machine learning surrogate models. So machine learning surrogate models are basically a simplified version of a complex and a higher order models, where we use where the surrogate model basically mimics the machine learning models, but with less compute time and less resources. So the main idea for us is to train a multi-layered neural network with multiple layers on thousands of synthetic atmospheric spectra, try to learn the pattern between the atmospheric properties and make some rapid predictions based on new observations, and bring down our time from hours or days to minutes. But when we are gaining this speed, are we maintaining the accuracy? So that was our main question. So our approach was to generate training data. So we generated synthetic atmospheric spectra using a forward model with Markov chain Monte Carlo. And it was coupled with a physics-based radiative transfer code called petit reference. And then we trained the neural network. We trained a separate transmission and emission on the neural network on a Python library called Mars on the synthetic spectra dataset we produced with a forward model. And it took us roughly 9.5 minutes to do so with a 32-core CPU, which was parallelized. If we were to do a regular training on a regular data set, then it would take hours or days to do so. And a big part of our project was to make the model more accurate. So we spent a lot of time in terms of fine-tuning the model to handle the noisy data and to avoid overfitting or generalization on the trend it was assuming. And at the end, we compared the synthetic transmission and emission spectra predictions with the observational data of exoplanets for SD 189-733b and CJ1214b. So what we found was, in terms of the transmission spectra for the former planet, we have the wavelength in the y-axis and the amount of light blocked, or the transit depth in the y-axis, wavelength on the x-axis. And we try to fit the model, which is given by the purple curve, with the observational data given by the blue dots. Model does not do really well. R-square value goes from 0 to 1, and higher the R-square value, the better the model is fitting the data. In this case, it's at a midpoint, which is not so well in terms of what we want to gain from it. And but what we can find is, to some extent, that the reason where the carbon dioxide is being observed around that 4.3, 4.4 micrometers, we see that reason being identified. Not with a lot of accuracy, but with we at least see there is a possibility of it doing better. So, and there are a bunch of places in this graph that the model and the data does not match well. But when we look at the emission spectrum for the same planet, we have wavelength on the x-axis and the secondary eclipse state. What it means, like the planetary thermal emission is given in the y-axis. So we try to fit the model with the observed data, model data given by the red curve, crimson curve, and the R-square value is 0.85, which is pretty good, which was a stronger model fit than the last one. It successfully determines the carbon dioxide emission region and also the carbon monoxide emission region in the spectra. So that was a fairly good result compared to the last one. And we did the same thing with a different planet in this case, but we're doing for the emission spectrum again. We see a good fit in terms of the model data with the observed data with the R-square value of 0.89, which is better than last time as well. And it shows a stronger model fit. And in the bottom plot, what we have is like the same plot as above with the wavelength and secondary eclipse depth, but we try to like disperse our model into different components of it. So we have the ensemble prediction, we have the physics constraint and multi-smoothed, and the final prediction. So ensemble prediction works with like avoiding overfitting of the data, avoiding generalization. Physics constraint basically brings in the physics that we want the model to learn from. Multi-smoothed reduces the noise from the data itself, and the final prediction is a combination of all three of these. And we try to plot that with the observed data, and there are some reasons of this where the model agree, and some reasons the model spread out quite heavily. But at the end, we determine the final prediction is doing fairly well in terms of its R-square value, but there's always room to improve in this case as well. So what does this all mean at the end of the day? So what we found is that surrogate models accurately recover the emission spectra, but does not do very well on the transmission spectra. And also that we need to implement more physics informed constraints in terms of the atmospheric physics and chemistry that goes in the atmosphere, the mixing ratios of different chemical compounds, cloud and haze composition and all things like that to improve the model reliability. But the model does really well in terms of identifying the regions or the atmospheric regions where these atmospheric molecules are found in both of these observations. And the results demonstrate that the surrogate models are fast and reliable tools for emission retrieval with a high R-square value, and it brings the runtime to minutes from hours to days if we were to do it with a regular data set. But with transmission modeling, there's a lot of work to be done. So our next step is to incorporate more physics-based constraints to improve the transmission modeling and try to generalize this across a diverse range of exoplanets. The couple we used are somehow different from each other, but we need to do this testing with over multiple ranges of exoplanets, ranging from rocky planet to ice giants. And one major thing we want to work on is to work on the model interpretability. So what interpretability means is that we try to quantify the impact of a parameter, on the model itself. So if we can quantify the impact of a certain parameter in the model and try to isolate it, we can use that information to work on surrogate models or other machine learning models that can improve its efficiency in a much rapid manner. And all of this is definitely being done to develop user-friendly tools for astronomers so they can run these retrievals for different exoplanets and then can gain valuable information if the exoplanet has certain chemical compounds, and at the end of the day, if they are being produced by a living organism or not. So that's basically what I spent the last 8 weeks over the summer. So I thank you all for your attention, and if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we have Aidan next.
Okay, so hello everyone. This summer I worked in debugging Feisty, fishery size and functional type model. And what that basically means is, for a little background, Feisty is a mechanistic model that includes multiple fish functional types and size classes. So a little background in fish. Most of the commercially important fish species fall into 3 different functional groups: small pelagic fish, large pelagic fish, and demersal fish, which, while there are ways of documenting their populations, there remains a need to understand the dominant factors determining the global distribution of these functional types in order to better predict the changing structure of how fish communities populate, which basically means in practice that it's a simulatory tool that takes into consideration things like temperature, carbon flux, zooplankton biomass, and zooplankton mortality, all that data, and it predicts various functions relating to how the fish populations move over time and things like that. So what I have been working on, specifically in relating to Feisty, is fixing this major issue finding the root of the cause of some errors and switching from an old dated environment to a new updated environment with new libraries. So Feisty in general is a little bit not old, but it was originally written in MATLAB and moved over into a Python format. So there's a lot of changes in how we want the environments or what's possible to be used with it. So there's a lot of new libraries, new Python libraries that can be added to Feisty that I was working on implementing. There was like a working environment that was working in Python. However, it had some dated libraries version-wise, and the new environment had new libraries that the old environment didn't have. And as you can see, the old working environment produced charts like these, and the new environment that I was given produced charts like these, which, as you can see, the data wasn't presenting itself in a way that it should be, where it looked like the problem was somewhere after initializing, because the starting data was generally correct. I mean, to a degree of accuracy. And my process in searching for these errors was initially directed by examining the ZAR files created from running data in these environments, in two separate environments, the environment that we wanted and the environment that we didn't want. However, so I wrote code that produced these ZAR files in a presentable way that I can compare the two, and seeing what differed between each environment and how it was taking the data in and how it was utilizing it. However, most of the issues with doing this process, and what took most of the time was discovering what was causing inconsistencies between the file formats. A big problem with comparing the two was I found out that Xarray, one of the libraries in the environments, changed how it chunked, how it presented the forcing data. That was the biggest breakthrough. However, there was also an inconsistency in what the location of where the Z metadata was stored, which was kind of the most important part in comparing the two environments and seeing how they utilized the data and how they stored it temporarily, which I fixed by initially downgrading Xarray into a shorter version, or a lesser version, but then later found a workaround to force the Z metadata itself by editing two different files, one called data wrangling and the other called the offline driver. And all of this work, it was basically like a big scavenger hunt of finding where the issue originated from and how I could replicate the data to the exact same production, because the data was there. It wasn't simulated. It was all just trying to see how it was loaded into the system. And I found the root cause of the error to be the chunking. And the chunking is basically how the program split the data sets into smaller blocks to be loaded and processed back into the model, which was a lot of work to figure out. Big scavenger hunt. And so what I learned, a big part of this was, in general, just getting things up and running. Feisty was not on an accessible, or it's an online version. I had to download everything, which was a lot of work in figuring out how GitHub worked. I have not very much used GitHub in my life, which this was really good for learning into it, as well as interacting with Jupyter notebooks. I found that very interesting in how I've never used it before and how intuitive it was. And then also just learning more into how Python library structure works and how environments interact with the model. The actual science end of it was also kind of interesting in learning how fish, like learning the roots of it, learning what the data was used for and what was supposed to be seen. And as for future work into how this can be continued, I worked a little bit in specific cases that related to outlier data from long-term runs used in the model when it was working, when it became working, which has promise into seeing that using the environment, the original environment, I believe that the outlier data wasn't present, but with the new environment, it was. And so the idea that the chunking, the issue that I solved, and how I fixed the program by manually changing how the data was chunked in the forcing data. There is promise into seeing that fixed these outlier cases. However, I didn't have time in my program to look at that outlier data. Otherwise, the chunking, the update in X-ray was also it was useful. It's an updated version. So the things that it updated kind of lacked or improved for efficiency. At times, the model was running maybe I think at the last point it ran like for 20-40 minutes, something like that. It varied depending on how many years I used. A lot of the work was waiting for the model to finish running, which it was varying on the years. If I chose 2 years to look at the data, I could only see how much it varied for those 2 years. But if I chose 5 years, it would take longer. So in the end, we want this program to be running for 50 years, like 50-year simulations, which is about, as it is now, about like a 13-hour runtime, which for the version that I was working on a lower resolution model, which at that point, why wouldn't you just use the higher res model? Though there's applications into seeing how the same environment that was used in the low res model could be used in the high res model. So potentially, this did lower the efficiency, but made it work more in Jupyter Notebook. And so there's lots to do. It's still it's a very promising program into seeing how commercial fish can be affected by temperature and by the amount of carbon in the water, as well as other various, it was mostly just zooplankton mass, the beginning of the food chain, and temperature and carbon, which in our changing environment would be very useful to be known, especially simulating years down the line. So there's a lot of promise in that. And that was my summer. So I just want to say thank you to NSF, the CI Compass team, the U.S. National Science Foundation, and NCAR specifically for giving me the opportunity to work on this amazing work. Thank you.
Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for your presence in this symposium. My name is Ejay, Aguirre, and I'm very grateful to have been part of the Ocean Observatory Initiative. And today I'll be sharing my project connecting climate phenomenon and accessible data, and so analysis with OOI, ONC, and NEON infrastructure. So my focus was to explore how climate patterns like El Nino and La Nina appear in ocean temperature data. Differences in cyber infrastructure affect what we can actually detect in those patterns. The main objective was to retrieve comparable environmental data from 3 major scientific infrastructures, those being the Ocean Observatory Initiative, Ocean Networks Canada, and the National Ecological Observatory Network, along with some supplemental data from NOAA. The second goal was to assess how easily that data can be assessed with slotted when plotted with ENSO overlays using Python and Jupyter Hub. And I also wanted to ensure that everything I did was thoroughly documented so others could reuse my workflow without having to start from scratch. Now that we know what my project involves, or what it involves, it involves pulling ocean temperature data from OOI, ONC, and NEON. The real question becomes why do we compare them? The answer has two parts. First, ENSO is a global climate driver, and second, the cyber infrastructure behind each data set affects what you actually see when you plot the data. El Nino and La Nina are part of the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO for short, which affects ocean currents, marine ecosystems, and even weather patterns. Detecting ENSO's influence in the data, a long-term measurement is definitely needed. However, each data captures the ocean in its own entirely different way, with different depths, sensors, and sampling rates. And how data is stored, formatted, and shared directly impacts the clarity of the climate signals in our graphs. And one thing, a very big vocabulary I just learned about was granularity, meaning the level of depth, or level and detail in depth, time, and location, which can make a big difference between clearly seeing an ENSO signal or missing it entirely. Moving to my workflow, it had three main stages. First was to retrieve the data. I explored sites and located datasets pulled from OOI via Jupyter Hub and Threads. And I also retrieved ONC data via ERDAP or file downloads and accessing NEON's air and freshwater temperature data through its own API. Second, I had to clean and filter. It involves converting timestamps to a common format, applying quality control, and even resampling everything to monthly means so that data sets could be computed fairly. And third was plotting. I generated temperature trends, overlaid ONI-based ENSO phases, prepared side-by-side figures for comparison, and documented every steps and challenge along the way. In the next few slides, we'll show the graphs I created. Here is the first one, which is the ONI index itself, plotted in Python. This graph shows the oceanic Nino index with El Nino periods shaded in red and La Nina periods shaded in blue. It is clear you can pretty much see the alternating warm and cool phases, some lasting multiple seasons, which essentially forms the baseline reference for interpreting our temperature data. And this phase will guide the comparison of how different data sets capture ENSO events. The next plot compares monthly air temperature in orange and water temperature in blue from the global station Papa Array located in the Gulf of Alaska. Both lines shows seasonal cycles with subtle correlation to ENSO overlays in certain years like 2017 to 2019 for water temperature. Otherwise, that could also be seasonal data, but this subtleness could be due to the higher latitude global station Papa Array is set up on. In this ONC dataset, we see monthly water temperature from Folger Deep and Barkley Upper Slope, located west coast of Vancouver Island in Canada. The ENSO-related shifts are more subtle than the OOI data. This is likely due to the location, depth, and local ocean conditions, where in this case, the lighter blue being Folger Deep was recording data from a coastal area where its depth was around or below 90 meters, and the darker blue being Barkley Upper Slope, which was stationed in the ocean but recorded data at around or below 400 meters. This highlights the influence of site characteristics on the visibility of ENSO signals, and hence the correlation was cited from the graph. This NEON dataset tracks monthly air temperature from 3 different sites, being Oregon, California, and Hawaii, and monthly water temperature from Oregon, California, and Alaska. These sites were chosen only for being located near or at the Pacific region, and the weak correlation reflects differences in geography, location again, having only showcased seasonal data with no correlated retrospect to the ENSO overlays. So comparing these graphs, 2 themes stood out to me the most: ENSO insights and infrastructure impacts. On the ENSO side, overlays make it clear where temperature anomalies match ONI-based El Nino and La Nina periods. Higher latitude sites show weaker short-term ENSO signals like Global Station Papa and from Neon's station where I forgot its name. It's sited in Alaska, and it reveals that gradual long-term shifts and sensor depth and temporal resolution clearly affect how visible these patterns can be. On the infrastructure side, OOI data's access was relatively streamlined and easy to access. ONC offers high resolution data, but its access was fragmented with data sets being sliced per year, making it quite difficult to concatenate a long-term data set. And Neon had consistent formatting, but its ocean comparability was limited only because they didn't really have any sites measuring the ocean environment. And of course, this project wasn't without any obstacles, with technical challenges including missing metadata from CSV files, API quirks like slicing limits and throttling data access, and deciding whether differences were due to environmental conditions or the way the data was even structured. From these, I learned that granularity is a research design decision where you would need to match your resolution to your question. And of course, documentation is just as important as retrieval, and data literacy needs to include infrastructure libraries. So future steps for this project would definitely need to include expanding to more sites for better spatial coverage, and of course, incorporating other climate indices like Pacific or like PDO, which is Pacific Decadal Oscillation Index, and NPGO, also known as the North Pacific Gyre Oscillation, to put ENSO patterns into a broader context. So I'd like to thank Jeffrey for his mentorship and project direction, Jim for his guidance on data access, Craig for his support with ENSO index context, and Stace for her support in data understanding. This project was funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation under Grant 2127548 and supported by CI Compass, which provided valuable training and collaboration opportunities with cyber infrastructure. This includes my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Started out I told mine Cupid's new target, automated regridding and high resolution notebooks. I spent my summer at NSF NCAR, and just about me, I am a undergraduate student at Creighton University studying data science. So a little bit of background before we get into what I worked on this summer. NCAR, or some of what NCAR does is they develop the CESM, which is the Community Earth System Model. It's a fully coupled global Earth system model used to perform science to best understand the Earth system variability and global change. So as a way to better understand the output of these CESM runs, there's a package called Cupid, or the CESM Unified Post-Processing and Diagnostics Package. And this package simplifies the user's experience of running diagnostics. It supports time series generation, data standardization, diagnostics, and metrics from all of the CSM components. And Cupid is supported both as part of the CSM workflow and can be run independently. So I had two goals or projects that I worked on this summer. My first goal was to begin developing a new diagnostics for specifically like a high resolution model runs. These high resolution simulations are able to capture features that are often missed with these lower resolution runs. And then my second goal was to focus on integrating automated regridding into the CSM workflow. While Cupid includes built-in notebooks for various components, many time series files are incompatible with these diagnostics due to differences in grid structures across model runs, particularly when comparing like older simulations to newer ones. And this automated regridding helps streamline the process and improve cross-case analysis. So to dive a little bit into my high-resolution notebook that I was working on, I started out with this project to better understand Cupid itself and its processes. I was able to explore in the existing diagnostic notebooks to develop a better understanding of how these notebooks are put together and use them as a starting point for my notebook. Through this exploration, I was able to understand the necessary aspects of these notebooks. With my notebook, I used an existing high-resolution case run to start developing different plots and learning the format of the data output to see what was possible and what I could actually accomplish. I was mostly looking at temperature and precipitation variables. But this was as far as I got into this project. Once after I was talking to a couple scientists and other software engineers, we realized that the most useful high-resolution notebook was going to be for tropical cyclone diagnostics, specifically high resolution. But due to some limitations and need for additional integration work and other things to happen before we could make this notebook, I wasn't able to move forward in developing it to its intended goal and within the available time I had. So that kind of got put on the back burner and will likely be a project for another intern at some point. And then shifting over to my second project was integrating regridding into the CSM workflow. To talk about the workflow itself a little bit to start, once you have your CSM output, you enter the post-processing steps. And it is here where you generate a few configuration files and later generate your time series files. And then once those steps are complete, you shift to your diagnostics part of Cupid. You shift to your diagnostics part of Cupid, and then once those run, you have a website output that's easy to see and understand. But at the end of the post-processing steps, I added this remapping step. This is necessary due to many of the diagnostics notebooks comparing multiple runs, like I said before. When comparing these cases, they need to be on the same grid for accurate comparisons, since older CSM runs use a different grid than current runs. And we convert the newer output runs to match the old grids. The reason for this mismatch is the evolution of the CSM atmospheric model. Older CSM versions use it's called a finite volume dynamical core grid, and this is a regular structured grid, but our newer CSM versions use a spectral element dynamical core grid, which is unstructured. I have two images on here to show kind of the differences. While this spectral element unstructured grid has performance and resolution advantages, it's harder for standard analysis tools and Python packages to work directly because it's not like an XY grid when it's flat. The difference in grid structure means regridding is necessary for diagnostics that involve comparisons between these grids. And to integrate remapping into this workflow, I had to make changes to a few different files, making changes to how some of the configuration files were being generated, as well as this file called CSM post-processing, which orders the steps. And it's there where I added this regridding step. And a file when you're running the CSM workflow to say, yes, I do want to complete these remapping steps. Once these changes were made, I spent the rest of my summer debugging various issues within some of these notebooks and files in order to ensure that this remapping is integrated smoothly. So as some conclusions and this future work, I was implementing this built-in regridding, and this streamlines the process that's often necessary for these diagnostics, and it helps improve the CSM workflow's flexibility and usability and creates a foundation for this future work. And for some future work within this project, we hope to expand this regridding capabilities to support multiple target grids and incorporate user-defined regridding options for greater flexibility in diagnostics. And then a couple of acknowledgements. I want to mention my mentors, Mike Levy, Tegan King, and Brian Dobbins for all of their help, and especially NCAR and CI Compass for all of their support.
Yeah, so hello everyone. I am an undergraduate student at Ball State University. During the summer, I had the privilege of learning as an intern at the National Science Foundation NCAR under the guidance of expert scientists at the Mesa Lab. I focused on two topics, which was learning about difference plots for extreme weather tracking and understanding DAF's parallelism for large-scale data analysis. So the first half of my summer was focused on conducting in-depth research of difference plots and experimenting with them with the goal of applying these computations to the weather tracking software that we were going to work with. A brief introductions to difference plots is that these computations are used to visualize differences between two measurements of some field, usually like precipitation or temperature. You can see them used as variables on the right. And these computations can help highlight discrepancies when the fields are on different grids. With this, I learned how to use Python packages xarray for gridded data and uxarray for ungridded data to perform element-wise subtraction with multi-dimensional arrays. uxarray is unique in that it extends off of xarray's data structures by adding unstructured grid-aware functionality through a UX grid accessor and specialized methods. And it's crucial that xarray relies on coordinate labels to align data before computation, which can be a challenge with coordinates composed of unique grid structures. On the other hand, if the arrays have different shapes, xarray will first attempt to broadcast the smaller array to the larger ones to form a common shape. And of course, the arrays aren't always able to perform this technique due to possible different coordinate systems. So this is where uxarray comes in to perform a remapping technique instead. Now with remapping, as I mentioned in the previous slide, this technique is used to compare plots of different grids. There are numerous algorithms in uxarray like nearest neighbor, inverse distance weighted or IDW, bilinear conservative. And with my initial topic, I worked more closely with understanding bilinear and conservative algorithms. For bilinear remapping, the value at the new grid point is calculated by using a weighted average of the 4 nearest grid points as shown in the visualization to the left. And this especially works well for smooth, continuous fields like temperature or pressure, where it is more important to keep track of gradual transitions and less about exact conservations. On the other hand, conservative remapping is more strict in where it ensures totals like rainfall or mass that are conserved across the remapping process. This is especially a great approach when analyzing fluxes or energy budgets with small changes, since they can throw off the entire results at the end. And to help understand conservative remapping, the visual to the right, the pink square is an input cell that overlaps with the target grid cell. The overlap between the two cells is critical as it determines how much of the original value gets passed into the new cell. So instead of interpolating based on nearby values, it instead focuses on total quantities based on how much area overlaps in all. So focusing with the extreme weather tracking softwares, my initial topic was to use the kilometer scale model output to apply difference plots computations across with tropical cyclone events using either tempest extremes or towback. However, the scientists I worked with were still validating which software would be more suitable based on both scientific and technical factors. On the scientific side, we considered the best approach to remapping. For example, whether remapping a coarse resolution dataset to high resolution grid or vice versa would impact the accuracy of the results. Even though this is more accurate, it does require more memory in all since it holds both of the copies of a high resolution grid throughout the remapping process. My mentor and I discussed that this added more precision that may just introduce interpolation noise that wasn't necessarily meaningful for the specific scientific goals the scientists wanted to work with. And on the technical side, factors like memory usage, computation time, and software language dependencies were discussed. Regarding this, it's important to know that Tempest Extreme actually is written in C++ and doesn't integrate directly with xarray. So we even discussed developing an interactive IP widgets interface to make it more accessible instead. And even though I was unfortunately unable to move forward with this topic, exploring both software tools gave me valuable insight into how climate scientists choose tools for large-scale data analysis. These considerations highlighted the complexity behind choosing a software solution with how it aligns with the goals, resources, and constraints of the overall project. So the second part of my summer was focused more on DAS separately, and this allowed me to acquire skills in parallel computing, where I worked directly with Casper PBS to understand how I can perform data analysis across multiple CPU cores with a different number of nodes. And it was interesting to learn about something DAS uses called lazy evaluation, which the name itself just kind of makes me laugh sometimes. But this basically builds a task graph, but delays running it until the very end. And this helps optimize the workflow and reduces unnecessary steps. So with working with DAS directly, I perform simple QR decomposition on the Jupyter Hub to understand the diagnostics, where the percent CPU usage compared to the memory based on the size of the matrix that I had of 160,000 of 10,000 chunk size. For this, looking at profile object, it was able to show the execution time for each task by worker, or in this case, threads. And I was able to know that similar tasks were computed with QR decomposition are grouped by color, and each block represents its respective task. The graph below shows how the system resources were used instead. They show how over time, with each group being a quarter of a second. And this is helpful in observing how resources demands fluctuate throughout the task execution. For example, the CPU peaks during intensive computing stages memory usage trends and the periods of low CPU memory usage, which may indicate inefficiencies in the task graph or suboptimal chunking instead. So with everything I learned this summer with parallel computing, DASC, and X-ray, I hope to apply everything that I learned with it into my future studies and continue working with multidimensional arrays because I've never worked with X-ray before, and it was very interesting. I also learned how to consider both the scientific and technical considerations when deciding on new software to use for computations in a project, and that was especially noted when my mentor and I were going back and forth about whether or not to use temperature extremes or towback because there's so many factors that you have to consider before you even apply it into the project. And considering my computations in DASC was trivially small at first, I still want to work on personal projects when working with possible daily global temperatures over a span of a year and finding averages within these data sets. I'm excited to learn more about this topic. It's very interesting. And for acknowledgements, I deeply appreciate the guidance from Caitlin Fitzgerald for helping me work with the UX array at first. And of course, my mentor, Brian Dobbins, for all your guidance and support throughout the summer. And thank you, NSF CI Compass and NCAR for supporting me in this amazing opportunity this summer.
Okay, so my presentation is going to be a little bit different. So in the last year, I've done 3 internships, and I'm going to go through each of them very briefly to cover what I've done. So we'll begin. I like this quote from Mike Tyson. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And if you haven't been punched in the face in your academic career yet, don't worry, it's coming. So be prepared for that. So I actually found out about CI Compass by accident. I was on a mailing list for upperclassmen in the computer science program, and I am not a computer science major. My major is actually cybersecurity information systems. So I apply, and it was a long shot, but I figure, okay, what's the worst? And they accepted me. It was amazing. So I go through the spring program, it was really excellent, and then they placed me at NCAR with Brian Dobbins, which I know some of you have had as a mentor as well. And I showed up to Brian Dobbins, and to be quite frank, I came to the Mesa lab and I probably couldn't program my way out of a paper bag. And Brian was absolutely fantastic. He was really patient with me. He walked me through the steps to learn how to build the understanding on my own. And we started working with the high performance computing, Docker. I used Dask, a lot of Python, a little bit of Fortran. And so that was really good to see like lower level languages and where we've advanced to higher level stuff. And so I worked on some programming there, and I can now successfully say I can write a script to move my data around. A lot of the stuff that I do in school is mostly red teaming and hacking. So whenever I go into an environment, I'm always looking at how can I break this? Where is security lapsed? And that's a lot different versus scientific research. So I got to learn a lot and really see the environments, how they're being used currently. There's a lot of money invested into these systems. And so being able to identify risk and where that works with the availability is really interesting because obviously if we're putting all this money into these systems, they need to be secure, but also they need to be usable. And scientists need to be able to accomplish their goals. So NCAR was awesome. This is the plane that we had there. That was a really cool tour. I had a great time there. So then moving on, if you're the smartest person in the room, you know you're in the wrong room. Like I said, I couldn't program. I hadn't taken college algebra yet. So there was things in the CESM code that I didn't understand whatsoever. And it was like, this is physics. And I was like, oh, great. And I go and watch a YouTube video on physics. And now I have some understanding of how this works. It was awesome. The girls next door to me were postdoctorate students from Harvard. And I'm an undergraduate in Eastern New Mexico with a very small computer science program and an even smaller cybersecurity program. So being around people that knew all of these various topics, including the CI Compass team, was fantastic for me. Moving on, I applied for the UNOLS-MATE internship, and we sailed across the Pacific from Hawaii to Alaska on one of their first ever cruises for cybersecurity. So I got to go on a boat, which was awesome, and I got to see operational and informational technology combined in that intersection there. And so this is the Sikuliaq. It's a large vessel. It's really nice. I know some of you have been on it. It's a really excellent trip. Don't worry about the seasickness. It goes away after a little bit. So a lot of what we did on the RV Sikuliaq was geared toward infrastructure and networking, which I was really comfortable in. That's more my field. And so we worked with the Fortinet systems, as you see here, and they sent us over firewalls and switches, and we built a full virtual network. And Julian Race and Kyle Gronwald were my mentors there from University of Alaska Fairbanks. And we got to build these networks and then break these networks. And so that was really great for me. A lot of times with cybersecurity, having an intern, you don't want them to touch anything because the network works now, it's secure. And if they break something, it may not be able to be fixed, or at least not easily. So here we got to build them from scratch. Fortinet was an excellent product, and it's really, you see the term single pane of glass. You can see all of the different features that they had. And during that time, I was able to get certified from Fortinet in their security fabric, as well as one of their basic cybersecurity certifications. So that was excellent. Now I understand how to protect the research that I seen at NCAR happening, right? Because we're collecting all this scientific data. Now, how do we implement it to be secure? This is the water wall here. It takes water from the front of the boat, passes it through here, and collects a lot of serial data, which was really interesting. And they use the Open RV DAS system. And I was actually on board with Pablo Chacon, who helped create that. So that was really interesting to see how we make timestamps. How do we keep all of this information in line, and how do we process it? This is here in Alaska, and we have the CTD behind me. That was really interesting to see how that operational technology works with the winches and all the various things that we do there. Some more pictures here. And then I got to be on board with Mahid, and that was excellent because he works on the community of practice for his dissertation. And it made me feel like I was doing the right thing because I don't come from the technical background, and my major is in computer science. So a lot of times I felt out of place. And he showed me that it takes a whole army, it takes a village, to make these things happen. So that was super important for me. And then finally, I moved on to Carnegie Mellon this summer, and I spent the rest of the summer over there after returning from Alaska in April. And I worked for them in a fellowship program. I took 3 graduate level courses, cyber intelligence, network defense, and information security policy management. And that was really eye-opening, especially the operational technology that I continued to see and how the scientific research is implemented and how we have these expensive systems that need to be protected. And I worked with the Software Engineering Institute, building threat modeling databases and gathering information from different varied data sources and implementing them into risk analysis. Some of that I cannot share, but it was really interesting. And so we did it through Hines College. some pictures. We actually also wrote, I wrote my first paper using the ORCID ID that I created with CI Compass, which I didn't know before, but now I actually have something finally to put under that number. I wrote a paper on post-quantum cryptography and the risks to the critical infrastructure sector, and it is in the final stages before I post it through Carnegie Mellon. So we got some stuff done there. I also did some threat analysis, and a big part of that, being on the RV Sikuliaq and seeing that we have legacy systems. We build these boats and they last 30, 40 years because we take care of them and we maintain them, and that's a good thing. But the problem is that the technology we use advances at a much faster pace than the infrastructure itself. And so what happens is you end up in a position where you have Windows 7 and what we call a snowflake. It won't work with anything else. It cannot upgrade to Windows 11. And so you end up with a lot of risk there and vulnerabilities. And that's something that you need to mitigate. And so the biggest takeaway that I learned from these 3 internships is that you just got to roll with the punches. You don't have to be the smartest, the most technical, or the most experienced, and that success in the field comes from the willingness to struggle, adapt, and keep going. If cybersecurity and technology was easy, everyone would be doing it, and we do it because it challenges us and it is hard. And when I say it is hard, that's my personal experience. If it's easy for you, I congratulate you. But I routinely find myself reading documentation that I don't believe was built to be read by humans. And it's fantastic, right? I love what we do, and I'm really happy about it. And a special thanks to, and this isn't everybody here, but this is just a very short list. Everyone at the CI Compass team, you guys opened the door for me to be able to do this. And now I'm looking at graduate school. I'm actually considering a dual degree with the University of Pittsburgh law department and doing a Juris Doctorate in a dual degree with Carnegie Mellon's Master in Science for Information Systems Security Policy Management. The biggest bottleneck that I found is that all of this is great and we understand these things, but if you can't bridge the law and the technical background together, it's very difficult to create meaningful policy. We have people that make decisions for us that don't understand what we're doing. And if you do that, you're set up to fail from the beginning. So the documentation and the policy is really important. Working with Julian, Race, and Kyle on the RV Sikuliaq, I got to work in something that was familiar to me, which was policy implementation and disaster recovery. So I helped build some templates and some of the founding pieces to a disaster recovery policy and business impact analysis and things like that. So in the event, because we always say, not if, but when there is an incident, they know how to go about that. And they're excellent. And Brian Dobbins, I cannot tell you enough how much I appreciate that guy. He really walked me through a lot of this that I didn't quite understand. High performance computing clusters. I didn't understand how you could have multiple computers and multiple cores, and he walked me through that. Linux and Unix and using the commands to get the data I wanted in the place I wanted. Absolutely excellent. Any questions?
Okay, here we are. So can everybody see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. So my project, I kind of called it How Intelligent is Artificial Intelligence, because this summer, oh, my name's Tamara, by the way, and I'm an environmental engineering major studying at UConn. So this summer I was at NCAR and I was working on seeing what AI can do, specifically converting code to modern languages and architectures using large language models. And I worked with Kate and Brian, but also more Kate. So the goal of this project was to test the ability of a large language model to convert some old code from the atmospheric models at NCAR from Shell to Python to hopefully kind of make it a little more optimized, make it a little bit cleaner, and take advantage of the ability in Python to have some more organized like flow of the code. And then hopefully have more ability to use it in broader like applications. So, and then I also through that I wanted to inform software engineers at NCAR and also the scientists there and everyone of the possibilities of using large language models in development of software. And then of course through that I wanted to stay mindful of the environmental impact so that we can do the best job here. So I want to talk a little bit at first just about what are large language models and how they can help write code. So large language models are a type of AI that is tested on large amounts of very, very large amounts of data of text. And so then they're able to generate text themselves in various different language styles. And so this can have a lot of applications, and one of those is in software development. So there's different ways that people use them to help them with software development. Some of the people use them to help them by answering questions while they're programming and debugging if they have questions about how to implement maybe a certain algorithm or what like some functionality of a language, how to kind of work with that if they're maybe unfamiliar with that, either a library or a new language. And then some models work in a text editor so they can help you like finishing the line you're writing or the code block that you're writing. And then some people use them for what they call agentic coding, which is when the AI kind of takes over the whole project and can make like whole scripts and programs by itself. And so then down here, I just showed a couple different examples of models that people use, like ChatGPT, Claude, and GitHub Copilot. And then this summer we used Claude. So the script that I'm working on is part of NCAR's Community Earth System model, which is the topography updating script. And so what this script does is, since the whole model can only run for so long at a time on Derecho, which is NCAR's supercomputer, when the model has to restart to a new session, this script runs and it kind of updates the topography data, transferring it between files to smoothly restart the file or this program. And so, yeah. So I want to talk a little bit also about how Claude specifically works. So Claude is a large language model that works a lot like ChatGPT, if you're familiar with that, which is like an in-browser and generative chatbot. So you have like written prompts that it responds to. And on the left, I show how sometimes it will respond to them in the chat, and sometimes it will come up with its own documents. And so those might be text documents, and they might be script documents if you're asking it to write a whole thing. And so a lot of this summer, I worked on just kind of doing a lot of the trial and error, working out how you can use AIs, kind of trying to see how much you can ask of them and kind of pushing the boundaries. So I can hopefully help people learn what they can and can't do with them and how to best use it. And so with that, I found some good strategies from research and from experimentation with what I found really helped work. So one of the biggest issues with using large language models is kind of like, I guess you could call it a language barrier, where sometimes people find it difficult to explain to a large language model or an AI exactly what they want it to do. And so it will come out with output that's not what you wanted. And sometimes it's also like, imagine if you're telling a human to do something and they don't understand exactly what you're asking, they would ask for clarification, but AI models don't really do that. Instead, they just make assumptions. And so one way to get around that problem is to ask it to ask you questions, ask it to ask for clarification. So you say, this is kind of generally what I want you to do. Can you ask me a series of yes or no questions that will facilitate this process for Claude, clearing up ambiguities, And so that is, first of all, helpful in making sure that it does more what you want it to do. It's helpful to make it faster for you so that you don't have to keep going back and forth trying to say, can you change this? Can you make it to do this actually? And in fact, that's actually also helps you get better results, because I found that when you're working back and forth saying, oh, can you change this? Can you change that? Sometimes the output ends up getting worse and worse because it just gets messed up progressively as you're making problems or making changes. And then, of course, this is also better for the environment, because if you're able to use less prompts and ask less things of Claude, it will use less energy and less queries. So I think it's all around a good strategy to use. And then another strategy I found is giving Claude a role to take on. So you might say, pretend you're a very experienced web developer, pretend this project you're working on is very important for environmental pollution. Make sure that you pretend like you're very thorough, and just asking it to pretend these things, it can improve its output, and it helps also it understand the context of what you're working on and what you really wanted to do. And so then a lot of the beginning of the summer was kind of just playing around with different scripts, different things you can do. But then maybe the second half of the summer, I started really working on the topography updating script. And so this is kind of a very simplified explanation of what I did. So I first started with the role-playing strategy, asking to pretend like a skilled software engineer. You're taking into account all the nuances of each language, making sure you're not losing functionality. And so I asked it to first create a plan of how it would go about converting. And it came up with a really robust plan with talking about the different Python architecture. It was going to implement different stages, different error classes it was going to look for or classify things as. And then, so after I looked through that and thought that I was satisfied with the plan, then I asked Claude to go and follow this plan, carrying out the conversion. And again, then I went back to see the script that it came up with and made sure that it really followed the plan, which it did. It did have all of the architecture it wanted. It did have all the error classes it suggested. So that was really cool to see that it was successful with that. And then after that, the last kind of step of what my process was having Claude create a suite of unit tests to test the output of the conversion of the converted like the Python script against the shell script. And so I asked for lots of some revisions about this. This one was a little bit more rocky. I had some problems with some libraries that I didn't know if they were going to work. And I was like, can you change this? And this is when I started to kind of realize that like with a lot of needing the output of what it gives you, and it can kind of start to derail. And especially with Claude, because when you ask it to kind of make changes, it like restarts the whole document. And so that's kind of one limitation of Claude, because when you ask it to make changes, it starts to like, it'll fix one thing that you asked and then it will remove something else. And then you ask it, oh, can you put that back? And then it's like, yeah, okay. And then something else is missing. So that can be kind of a problem. So it would be interesting to look at other models that work kind of in the text editor, which might not have that problem. But anyway, so once I finally went back and used the original test suite, because like I said, it kind of started to go off the rails, it was actually almost ready to run right away. I ran it and I had to make just 2 minor changes, like one directory. And when it was calling it at the end, there were a few extraneous testing parameters. But other than that, it was basically ready to run right away. And it did successfully run very soon. So it was really cool to see how much the AI could do by itself. And so then when we tested it, this was the output. So there were about 50 tests and 33 of them passed, which is pretty remarkable that it could do all of this and actually have some successful testing data to look at. And so then since the summer's over, if I were to come back next summer or if someone were to continue this project, I think good steps would be to look kind of closer at the final script Claude produced and try to tweak it to see if we can get it to pass more of the tests and look at specifically what wasn't working. And then another cool thing might be to try out some different large language models that work with different features, maybe some that work in a text editor, and maybe we would see some increased functionality from there. And so then lastly, I just wanted to talk, like I said, about the environmental impact of AI, which is kind of a hot topic, and I think it's important to think about. So, of course, like AI is here, but it also uses a lot of energy. And so from manufacturing the hardware to training these models to then finally answering the queries and having to cool down this machinery, there's lots of stuff that it uses, so like lots of energy, lots of water. And so even though it's hard to know how much energy, there are some estimates, like some big models use maybe the same carbon equivalent of a round trip flight from New York to London to answer about 600,000 queries. And so even though that might not sound like that much, these models probably use around hundreds of millions or billions of queries every day. And so it kind of adds up. And so I thought it would be interesting to look at that figure and estimate how much energy I used this summer. So with about 50 prompts that I used, it used about the equivalent of like the carbon equivalent of a 60-mile car ride. And so I just think it's important to be thoughtful and mindful when we're thinking about when we want to implement AI into and integrate it into our development process, to make sure we're doing so mindfully and not using more than is necessary, so we can make sure that we actually have a good positive impact with the work that we do. Because I'm sure there's lots of great stuff we're learning with our work, and I want to make sure that we're not that we're being thoughtful about it. So yeah, and then I have some references of some of the things I researched. And I wanted to thank Kate and Brian from NCAR and the folks at CI Compass and my professor from UConn who helped guide me through the program this spring, and of course the NSF who made this summer possible.
So hi, my name is Dylan Hermosillo. I was also at OOI, also under Jeffrey Gladstein, and I also got some help from Sam Dahlberg. And just closing something. And my project was looking at how we could develop a convolutional neural network ice detection model from image stills generated from a camera attached to a surface buoy out of the Global Sea Array. So just for some background, this is the Global Sea Array. It's found in the North Atlantic, and it experiences everything you'd imagine out there. High wind, huge waves. Sensors are mainly picking up atmosphere to ocean changes, and the moorings all support sensors for things like heat fluctuation, moisture, momentum, and essentially looking at the water column. My project actually kind of arose because a new stream of data was being generated off of what is the surface buoy. So we see them on the top right. That's kind of just a diagram of what it looks like. And really what happened was there were some sensor issues picking up odd data and what was already being collected off this data stream. And so they needed to figure out if it was occurring naturally or if there was some technical problem coming out of just the environmental conditions. And what ended up happening was cameras were added to the surface buoy, and it was found that the sensors were being iced over. So really what they ended up doing was decreasing the braking speed on the wind turbines, which stopped them from dipping into the water and freezing over. And so that's just like an example of how you can just add things to cyber infrastructure to find fixes. But what's nice as scientists is that all of a sudden it creates new possibilities of data. So really it leads into this idea of now there's data generating from these still images. So thousands and thousands of images off 5 cameras taken every hour were being generated from the mooring. And by chance, there was this ice flow that was observed when someone was going over the images. So that got folks at OI thinking, well, what if we had more? Like, could we use it to kind of study how ice is flowing through this part of the North Atlantic? You know, what can we do? The issue is that there's thousands of photos. And so that kind of comes into like what my project is going to be is all the hurdles I've had to go into. So to start, when you develop a model, you know, it's always what's the data you're working with. So the biggest headache I think most people can agree on is data preparation. Like, how do you get the data in a good enough way that can be sent through a model, trained, and then utilized for like proper, robust scientific research? And so just like a little overview, you really start with just the data collection. I myself use Jupyter Lab and Jupyter Notebooks to just pull raw data off of the OOI data website. For the next thing I had to do was essentially pre-process it for all the different like computer vision tools. For me, that really meant ensuring the images were the same size, and then normalizing pixel values. And then depending on what framework or architecture or library you use, you're going to have to do something else. But for me, those were the 2 main things. And then finally, like the biggest headache is data annotation. So for my idea on generating this neural network is that I need a collection of images that I label as ice flow. So when I run it through the model, it can essentially learn what an ice flow is. So that means I need a lot of ice images. And that kind of lies the problem, which we always joked about in our meetings, was finding a needle in a needle stack because the ocean's obviously really big. And so the real problem, like I mentioned, there's all these cameras, but they're generating tons of just wildly different images, different angles, different times of day. Not all the time are they at the Garcia array. Sometimes they're like, well, when the ship was being sent out the first time. So I from my initial data streams, I had about 256,000 still images captured around the clock for multiple angles. And so you can imagine the personal fatigue you get looking at thousands upon thousands of horizon images, trying to see if like a little piece of white is ice. And other issues arise is that like in the middle column, the upper one, the camera's constantly pointed at the halo, so it's not really useful. So when we go into the solution, I essentially use two different tools to kind of break up the work to help me sort through the photos. After doing some initial like logic type stuff, I knew that the camera looking at the halo wasn't useful, so I took it out. I took out dark images, but I ended up using a unsupervised or self-supervised tool called Dino V2, which isn't a convolutional neural network. It's a visual transformer. And essentially what that does is it applies neural network architecture similar to natural language processing, but for computer vision. And so this is kind of like an example of what it does. We have this cute cat, and it does different types of tasks. So it splits it up into, on the left is depth estimation, on the middle is semantic segmentation, and on the right is instance retrieval. So in an ideal world, if like I could run all my images through this visual transformer and it would just say, oh, here's all your ice photos. But really, I used it as like a precursor to solving step one, is that I had too many photos. So what this did was it sorted all my photos into buckets, and then I was able to easily throw away 3 buckets that weren't going to be useful to me. So that way I didn't have to look at 300,000 photos. I only had to look at a couple thousand. It didn't work perfectly because nothing in research does. So I found another tool, also produced by Meta, called FACE, which is the Facebook AI image similarity search. If you've ever dragged an image in Google to look up similar, it's basically that. It's a library where I was able to take the original image that this whole project was conceived upon, and then process it through all my images that I got from the first tool, and then only gather images that were close in similarity based on the embeddings, which are numerical representations for the image. So that way I could look through even less images. So that way I didn't have to look at something that I knew wouldn't even have anything close to what an ice flow could be. So really, both of these steps are just to cut down the manual sorting that I had to go through so I could focus on actually developing the neural network. And so the results are bleak, but it's hard. Research is difficult, and the ocean is really big. And I just wasn't able to find any other ice images outside of manually looking and running all these different computer vision tools. It just doesn't seem like we were able to capture another one. And if you really think about it, these image stills are an hour apart from 5 different cameras. So just being able to get one is already kind of just a happenstance. And so, but we learned some things. So like one of the key issues is that even when you run things through a model, it's hard for them to separate what an ice flow could be. So this was one that I had found manually on the right. It is a cresting wave. It's not a piece of ice, but these cameras were originally meant to do something really specific, and now we're trying to use them for a secondary research purpose. So they're not the highest resolution. It almost could be ice, but it isn't. So that's just an example of how, like, results don't always happen the way you want them to be. I do have some next steps, though. I'm going to be applying the same types of techniques to do a convolutional neural network for cloud separation because I have lots of cloud photos. And really, like, it's just going to augment the rest of my time at OOI. They kind of do things, you get put in as a guest student. And the paradigm is that it's not something that anyone really on the team does, the project you're given. So you're really given ownership of what you got to do. And during my time there, I've never before worked on a machine learning project. So I was just given data and a dream and given a chance to really run with it. So it was really fantastic. And my final few weeks are going to be involved generating this cloud model. After that, I actually moved across the country from Tucson, Arizona to Raleigh, North Carolina. So I'm starting my PhD in bioinformatics at NC State under the director of the Bioinformatics Research Center. So I'm really excited to take like all these machine learning skills that I developed and never used and take them into my research, which is not image-based sorting, but I think just the groundwork and the chance to just dive into a research topic is super valuable. And so with that, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take them. And so I'd like to thank all the people that helped support me here. Obviously, CI Compass team, Jeff was great, Sam was super helpful, and it's just been a great time.
This summer, my project was integrating key performance metrics into Cupid for CSM diagnostic evaluation. So what exactly is CSM? CSM is the Community Earth System Model, and it is a global Earth System model that is developed by NCAR, which pretty much shows the different runs. It runs the data. It can do prediction modeling and other such stuff. And so part of my project was using Cupid. You've heard a little bit about it from Macy, but Cupid is the CSM Unified Post-Processing and Diagnostics. It pretty much unifies the post-processing thing to be automated. So it creates the configuration files and then also runs the diagnostics all in one command. And then you can see these outputs created in a web page. So my specific goal of the project was to enhance the Cupid workflow by integrating the diagnostics into a consolidated summary page. And so this is kind of what the workflow looked like while doing this project, is that I'd get the CSM output data and it'd go through a Cupid post-processing where it then creates these configuration files of Cupid, ILM, and ADF, and then also creating time series files. And then in the Cupid diagnostic workflow, it runs the ADF analysis and then runs the ILM benchmark. And then those outputs are then able to be seen through the Cupid web page generation. And specifically, there's a summary page that contains 2 key metric tables that have ADF output and ILM output. And just as like an accurate explanation of what ADF and ILM are, ADF is the Atmosphere Diagnostic Framework, and ILM is the International LAM benchmarking. So this is kind of what the index page for Cupid looked like beforehand. It only showed the parameters, global parameters of Cupid, and then on the side is where you would actually go to see the diagnostic output from these different from the run. I then changed it to still have the side output that you would get more specific diagnostic output from, but then now there are key summary tables that can let you look at, take a quicker glance to see if the outputs match what you think it should be or what you would want it to look like. And so, but if it does look correct, then you would then go to the side side of the page, and so you can look further into the diagnostics. What made this so important is that with it being able to have a quicker glance at these diagnostics and these outputs from the CSM model runs, it lets the scientists have a quicker look at these outputs. And so instead of having to spend time looking and searching for these file diagnostic outputs, can be in multiple different places, especially if they're looking specifically at land diagnostics versus atmosphere diagnostics. They can be it helps consolidate it. And so with it being all in one place, it really helps speed up the development process for not only future experiments, but also future development. And in the future, we hope to expand this page to include even more diagnostics from different aspects of the model, such as glacier and like river runoff diagnostics, and then also include better like things to look at, like graphs and charts for more visually inclusive output. And then finally, just to help make it so that scientists are actually getting the data that they want to see and not just everything, making it a little bit more customizable so that they can do specifically what they want to do with the stuff they have. And of course, I'm so grateful for this internship. It was so important to my success as a student. And then also thank you to my mentors, Brian Dobbins, Team King, and Mike Levy for their guidance. And thank you for CI Compass and NCAR for hosting this internship.